Welcome to a What the Bloomin' Heck Does It All Mean special with the Labour leadership contender, Emily Thornberry. Boris Johnson's biggest fan, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. My number-crunching hero, Anushka Asthana. A politicised comedian who's actually funny, David Baddiel, and a red brick knocked out of the red wall, Labour's Mellon, and one of the earliest blue bricks in that wall, the Tory, Andrea Jenkins. In the end, you overwhelmingly voted him back into number 10 to get Brexit done, and rather too many of you agreed with Labour's Alan Johnson that he isn't capable of leading most of you out of a paper bag. So, in the words of the former Chancellor, Philip Hammond, Johnson can now do more or less what he likes as an elected dictator, while Labour tries to work out how to reconnect with its army of traditional supporters who rejected it, and whether he, or she, or our guest, Emily Thornberry, is best placed to lead the party out of the wilderness. Did you notice my deliberate and incredibly apt Old Testament reference, Anushka?
I did not. I'll have to go back to Sunday school. Now, everyone is trying to deconstruct that election result. And I think one of the best things I've seen this week is from the FT's John Byrne Murdoch. Now, it involves his regression analysis, so bear with me. This is 1997. The dots are constituencies. On the left is how well Labour did. So the seats down here are Labour lost seats, and up here are the biggest Labour majorities. From left to right, the seats get increasingly working class in terms of the proportion of constituents. That upward line means that there was a strong relationship in 97 between the Labour vote and more working class constituencies. Now, Blair did well with every social group. He got at least 3 out of 10 voters. But among the most working class voters, he got 6 out of 10. Now, as I change this through elections, watch that line, but also this number up here. If it falls, it means the relationship is getting weaker. So look, it's a similar story in 2001, and then again in 2005. When we get into 2010, that line is starting to dip, and again in 2015. And by then, that number has more than halved, so the relationship is much weaker. 2017, the first year for Jeremy Corbyn, it dropped again, and then 2019, flat-lining, and the number at 0. No relationship between how working class a constituency is and the chance of voting Labour. Corbyn actually did just as well as Blair among the top socioeconomic group. But John says that in 22 years, Labour has lost a third of all its working class, unemployed and retired voters. Now, a lot of those voters, as we know, live in towns rather than cities. And when it comes to 2024, let me show you something interesting from the Fabians. They took Labour's 123 top target seats and they had a look at how many of them were filled with towns, and all the pink ones, the vast majority, only a handful in purple, are the ones based in cities. Robert.
Absolutely fascinating analysis there, Anushka, and I want to really get it straight into actually the consequence, really, of Labour no longer getting the majority vote of those on lower incomes. There's a lot of data showing the extent to which those on lower incomes have moved to the Tories. Why do you think that is, Mel? Because, of course, you paid a big price losing your seat in Grimsby.
Absolutely. I think, Labour needs to start listening to communities like mine. And, I did my best during my time in the PLP to express and represent what it was that people were telling me, and the things that people were worried about, and the things that people were concerned about, and what they wanted to hear from Labour.
What kind of things were they saying to you that Jeremy Corbyn apparently simply didn't hear?
I mean, in this election, obviously Brexit was a big factor. There was a really big issue with Jeremy Corbyn as well, in terms of credibility, trustability. People simply plain did not like him and didn't feel like he was for them. whatever he was for, whoever he was for, they didn't feel like it was for them. And until we start speaking the real language of those people and recognising what it is that they want out of life and offering that, then we are going to condemn ourselves to failing again and again and again.
Now, one of the things that was pointed out was that Gordon Brown, after he lost the election, got in touch with everybody who'd lost their seats pretty much immediately and said, sorry. Have you heard from Jeremy Corbyn yet?
No, he did walk past me yesterday
Right.
at Portcullis House and slowed down and did a double take and carried on.
No. He didn't say a word?
No.
That is extraordinary. Andrea, I pointed out in the introduction that in some ways your victory against Ed Balls was a sort of precursor to what happened only a few days ago, almost a sort of first brick out of the red wall when you won your seat. What does Boris Johnson have to do to keep the votes of those working class people who traditionally supported Labour?
I agree with a lot that Melanie's said, actually. You know, northern communities like mine and Melanie's, you know, they are the lost and forgotten communities by many governments over the years. And, you know, we find that the London Liberal elite is the issues where they're so out of touch with these Northern and Midlands communities. They don't want to be talked at. We are patriotic, you know, Queen and country for our armed forces, and, you know, and we've got a lot of pride in these communities. And Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party, they've tapped into a lot with the blue-collar conservatism. And, you know, it's actually delivering on our promises, which we will do. And I do believe, going back to Brexit, you know, this was the vote. I mean, I was the MP Brexit coordinator for the 52 constituencies in Yorkshire, and people were saying to me, these communities are being forgotten. And I think that finally they've got a voice, and finally they've been listened to.
But have they got a voice, Andrea? Because, I mean,
Yes.
one of the things that is quite striking, because for a lot of these people, their rights, particularly at work, really matter. You know, one of the first things that Boris Johnson has done since getting his majority is he struck out of the withdrawal agreement bill those protections that he'd originally promised for workers' rights. So in some senses, he seems to be ignoring the very people who put him into power.
Well, I disagree with that completely, Robert.
But why do you disagree with that? Because he has
can you
done
let me
that.
answer then?
Yeah, of course.
I'll tell you, Robert. Because it's in our manifesto anyway that we're protecting workers' rights. Look at how we've also raised, you know, the national living wage, minimum wage. And also, if you look at Britain anyway, we've always spearheaded workers' rights, whichever government...
But why did he take it out? Why did he take it out of the bill, though, Andrea?
Well, we don't need it because we are going to be the best anyway. Look at maternity leave. We are ahead on maternity leave and sick pay than any other EU country. We don't need it.
Yeah.
We will.
I mean, I think we need to just have a little reality check just on that particular point. You know, looking at bringing in employment tribunal fees, looking at the increased period of time that you have to wait before you even access workers' rights, curtailing the role of trade unions in workplaces, and an announcement that people will not be able to strike in public transport. So there is an indication, actually, that when it comes to workers, they will not be treated well by this.
We've got so much more to pick up on all of this. I'm going to pick up on all these points later, but I'm delighted that I've got... still the Shadow Foreign Secretary Emily Thornby running for the leadership. Emily, I just want to actually start with something that I think many people will be slightly shocked by, which was hearing, Mellon, who lost her seat. Jeremy Corbyn walked past and didn't say sorry. What do you sort of feel about that?
I don't understand why that happened, Mel. I mean...
No.
I don't understand. Well, we've spoken privately outside.
Yes.
But I think also just publicly, I think people involved in the leadership should be saying publicly how sorry we are for losing all of these hard-working stars that we've had in the parliamentary party and all of these MPs. And also, I mean, what broke my heart was I went up and down the country, worked in lots of marginals where we have potentially so many good people who put in so much work and who should have been elected. And I'm really sorry for all the work that they did and that they've not managed to get elected. But in the end...
that we've heard allegedly said, Emily.
Let's come back.
Yes.
We're going to come back to that later, but let's go on.
But in the end, I think the biggest apology is for those people who are going to suffer as a result of having a Conservative government for 5 years. And, you know, with that sort of majority, it's going to be really difficult to control them.
Now, to clarify, you are definitely a candidate.
I'm definitely a candidate.
Now, what did you make of something that surprised, I think, quite a lot of people when Jeremy Corbyn and his supporters said that even though you were trounced in the election, you somehow won the argument.
Well, I mean, the argument is a good one. And
what is the argument?
The argument being that we have to have a fairer society. Actually, I think the British way is for people to look after each other. We shouldn't have such great big holes in the safety net that any of us could fall into. We could end up having an accident at work, or our partner could die, or whatever, and we have to fall into a safety net, and it has such great big holes in it at the moment that you end up with whole families, you know, surviving on food banks and having to wait for weeks for benefits. That is a wrong way, you know.
But how much of the Labour manifesto do you actually back? I mean, many people said there was just way too much in it and it lost credibility as a result.
I mean, it's difficult when you look at the Labour manifesto. There's nothing in it, I don't think, that we could say, oh, I don't like that. I mean, it's great.
But politics is about choices.
It's about priorities.
You can't have everything.
It's about priorities. And the point is to get out the message and to say, you know, this is what we would like to do, but our priorities are, and also to say, here's a problem, and make it clear this is the problem. And then to say, once you've had the discussion about the problem, but we have a solution. And I think part of the problem was the way in which we presented it. People kind of just felt overwhelmed.
There were just too many promises, is what you're saying.
Well, I went to Australia in the summer and I spoke to the Australian Labour Party, and they just lost an election and they were really surprised. And when I spoke to Australians in the street and various places, they said we felt overwhelmed. We didn't know where the Australian Labour Party was going. And I fear that there was a little bit of that.
Did you say any of that when the manifesto was presented to the Shadow Cabinet?
There was a Clause 5 meeting in which we went...
Excuse me, yeah, forgive me.
No, I wasn't allowed to speak in the Clause 5 meeting apart from on foreign policy.
Ah. Were you surprised you weren't allowed to speak?
Yeah, well, the meeting went on for a very long time, as it was, I have to say. I was really surprised at the ability of people to be able to talk for 6 hours straight without a break. And when I spoke to members of the NEC about that, they said, oh, no, we always have meetings like this. I had to say I've never been at a meeting like that before.
Now, but just on that issue of things that you have said, you have made it clear today that you did argue to Jeremy Corbyn that it would be wrong to hold the election in the autumn. Do you know if any other members of the Shadow Cabinet...
No, I didn't argue that it would be... It wasn't the autumn that was the problem. Right. It wasn't the autumn that was the problem. The point was that from the moment that Boris Johnson was elected, he was trying to goad us into a single-issue election.
Exactly.
And what he was trying to do was to frame it as a Brexit election, and he was trying to take advantage of the fact that we weren't sufficiently clear on what our Brexit policy was. And that he could wrap himself up in the lie that he was going to get Brexit done and then not be held accountable for anything that the Tories have done over the last 9 years. And that we wouldn't have a general election, we would basically have a referendum as a general election and give him permission, therefore, and power for 5 years. We shouldn't have done that.
So you told Jeremy Corbyn that was a mistake to allow him that election?
I argued in the Shadow Cabinet, and obviously some people, you know, nodded in agreement with me.
But did anybody speak up? Did any other member of the Shadow Cabinet speak up in support of what you said?
There were a couple of others, Scottish and Welsh representatives who spoke up, from what I remember, in support of what I was saying.
Did Keir Starmer support you?
I feel embarrassed raising anything that happens in Shadow Cabinet as it is. I mean, let them speak for themselves. But I also, because I was so concerned about it, I tried to talk to Jeremy. It was difficult to get in touch with him, so I wrote to him and to the Leader's office, and I put in black and white what I thought, and I had a number of conversations with those in the Leader's office, but in order to make it clear that I thought that strategically it was going to be a catastrophic political mistake for us to go into a general election on a single issue when we were not sufficiently clear about that single issue, and when all the other parties were really keen to have it on a single issue because they all wanted to eat the Labour vote.
But just on that, those close to Jeremy Corbyn say that it was the pro-Remain position of people like you and Keir Starmer that cost the party significant numbers of votes in constituencies like Mells. So what do you say to that criticism? Because after all, you did lose a lot of Leave supporters in constituencies like Mells.
Yeah, no. I mean, I understand that, but what I say is that, first of all, we should not have had a referendum as a general election. I think we should have sorted out Brexit. We should have, whatever deal it was. I mean, I think I said in your programme, I said, you know, if Boris Johnson thinks that his deal is so great, why doesn't he put it back to the people and find out whether they think it's so great, and then we can move on, and then we can have a general election. That's what I was saying privately and publicly. I said it on this programme. I said it privately behind.
Mel, can I just ask you on that? Wouldn't it have been better to have had the referendum before the general election?
It would have been better to have agreed a deal, and the opportunity was missed by the Labour Party when we were in cross-party discussions to agree something sensible, the softest of soft Brexits, which was pretty much what Theresa May was about to offer, and we would have been beyond
So
Brexit.
just to be clear, what you sort of agree on, just to be clear, is that this issue should have been sorted before the general election.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel really frustrated the fact that Emily is still saying, we won the argument. Well, we didn't. We lost the election.
Exactly.
And we lost net 59 seats.
I don't think I completely answered what I was saying. I mean, I think
heartlands now have been demolished as a result of people going for a people's vote when there was never, ever a possibility of that being achieved. And I feel like people were led up the garden path for something that was never going to happen.
No, but Mel, that's not right. I mean,
But you've
that's
had
not
the
right.
blinkers on, Emily.
We were 3 votes behind getting sufficient numbers of parliamentarians to put a second referendum on Boris Johnson's
Robert, can I
deal.
come in?
That was the point.
A bit later, Andrew, if you don't mind. Sorry, I must...
And instead of pushing for that, we decided to allow ourselves to get pushed into a general election. We should not have done that. We should have held firm, and we should have gone for a second referendum or a confirmatory referendum on Boris Johnson's deal.
But I need to ask you about various other aspects of this, which are terribly important. Many people, actually including Andrea, but not just Andrea, lots of Labour MPs have said this to me as well, there was a perception that Jeremy Corbyn was not patriotic enough, is the word they use. Is that a legitimate criticism of Jeremy Corbyn?
Jeremy was asked a question about patriotism during the election, and I thought he gave a very interesting answer. He said that he was a patriot in that he loved the British people.
But is that...
And I thought that was really interesting. I know that...
You said it's interesting. What does it mean?
Well, it means that he loves his... I mean, our country is our people.
Yeah.
So he loves our country.
But why then do people not think he was patriotic enough?
I think there were a number of issues. I think, obviously, the one that the Tories have milked for all it's worth is Jeremy's reaction to Salisbury, but perhaps more importantly, it was the briefing after Jeremy made his statement on Salisbury, which was not on all fours with what Jeremy had said. And so the briefing to the press thereafter gave a different impression to the impression.
So this was a briefing that people attribute to Seamus Mill.
Well, I'm not mentioning names, but the point is that what you need to have in a leadership is you need to make sure that it's the leaders who decide and the advisors who advise, and there should not be any mixing up of the two. And frankly, you should have advisors who give advice, but the politicians make the decision, and the advisors implement those decisions and do not try and go back on it. By doing that, and it was done too often, I think that it weakened Jeremy. It weakened the impression that he gave people, and it looked like he was not certain, when quite often he had made a decision, but there was a contrary impression given by people who had not been elected in the first place.
I mean, just on that, after Theresa May won the 2017 election, she sacked her 2 lead advisors. Are you slightly surprised that Seamus Milne and Carrie Murphy are still in their jobs?
I think it's really sad to see the way in which the staff at the head office and in the leader's office are being told that many of them may be made redundant. But as far as I understand it, the senior people within those teams are not under such a threat. It does seem to me that if decisions have been made wrongly, it should be those people who pay the price and not those who are working night and day in junior positions.
So they should go, is what you're saying?
I'm saying what I'm saying.
You weren't visible on national television during the campaign. Did they stop you from going on national television?
Oh, well, I was available if they wanted to.
No, you were available, but why didn't
Well,
we see
you'd
you?
have to ask them. I mean, I was available, and if they wanted to use me, I was more than happy to do it.
Did you think about
I
disobeying?
did quite a lot of media during the 2017 election, but a decision was made, not by me, that I shouldn't do media, and obviously it was up to them. And in the end, I'm a team player, So those who are responsible for the campaign will make the decisions as who does what. So I spent my time going around marginal seats, where obviously that's where the difference is made. So that's what I was doing.
Now, one of the things that Anushka pointed out is the problem that Labour has in towns rather than cities. Labour has terrific representation in the big metropolises. Now, one of the questions you are going to be asked during this leadership campaign is what does a very metropolitan MP like you have to offer to voters in those towns?
I think I said 2 years ago in Blackpool, in one of the marginal town seats, how important it was for us to be focusing our manifesto on the needs of towns and smaller communities who have been too often looked over, so that you can find that many of those larger towns and cities will be connected to London, but they're not connected to one another. There's not the investment in infrastructure that you would expect. And so those sorts of things need to be, but I also said that I felt that those people in those smaller communities, within the Labour Party, within the Labour groups, in those smaller communities, should have been those who were hammering on the door and making sure that they were involved in the manifesto process, so that we do make sure that we are putting, when we close our eyes, we think of the smaller communities and the towns that Labour should be representing, and in our hearts, we know that we can.
But can I just put finally to you, therefore, the point that Andrea has made? For many of those people in those towns, they were angry at the perception that Labour was ignoring what they had voted for in the referendum in 2016, that they voted to leave, and somehow Labour, people like you, didn't want to know. How can you get their trust back?
Well, OK, so there are two reasons, right? The first is that just simply on a matter of principle, I think that many of the smaller towns and communities will suffer as a result of leaving the European Union, and I can't argue anything else. The second thing, though, is that the majority of Labour voters voted to remain, and we have seen from our own statistics, I've seen it, that those who voted to leave, and we've seen it here, are increasingly leaving us, and we know that. And what we need to do is look at why it is that they voted to leave. They voted to leave, one of the reasons being that they had been overlooked. Now, the answer to that is to make sure that you have social and economic policies that have them as your focus when you are making decisions about what it is that you do next as a government. That's the answer. That's the answer.
Look, lovely to see you, as always. Thanks for coming in. Enjoy the campaign, if that's the right expression to...
I will.
to put, and do come back in the new year. Please don't go away, because after the break, I will be speaking to the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, ahead of one of the biggest days of this government, the Queen's speech.
Go on.
Hello, welcome to the break. I'm joined by Emily Thornberry, #Peston if you want to tweet, and we are going to do Christmas at the Thornberrys.
OK, yeah.
It's looking very nice.
I'll be a bit drunker than that.
All right, so number one, what is for Christmas dinner?
Turkey.
Everyone have turkey?
Yeah,
do you cook it?
No, my husband cooks it.
Do you do it? What do you do? What's your role?
I'm the sous chef.
You're the sous chef. All right, cool. Who would you invite over?
Apart from the family,
Political
political
guests.
people. I mean, I could play safe and say Barbara Castle, because obviously everyone would want Barbara Castle. But I did some carols yesterday for Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. Wouldn't it be cool to have her and Gabrielle and Richard over? Wouldn't it be cool to have them all together at Christmas?
That would be nice. Oh, let's hope for her.
Yeah.
Ban topics at the dinner table. What gets a good argument going at the Thornberrys?
I'm not going into that.
How's
going
Brexit?
into that.
Do you all agree?
Not going into it.
Jeremy?
Brexit is fine.
Jeremy
No,
Corbyn?
I'm not going into the things we argue about, because we argue a lot. We do.
OK. No answer there. Oh, what do you watch on the telly?
Yeah, no, that's true.
Oh, sorry.
No,
But
it's fine.
Let's do telly first.
OK,
Queen's
so,
speech. Do you know what time it is?
No, I think I've seen the Queen's speech, but I seriously have been half asleep or not necessarily paying a great deal of attention to what I'm
Gavin and Stacey.
No, we see Doctor Who.
Doctor Who.
So we don't do presents until after lunch.
Oh.
And so we tend to miss
How'd
most
you
of the
hold off?
telly. Yeah, well, it was just that we had that
Very
when the
patient.
children were children. So
And what's your dream gift?
some time with the family, or with all of us arguing.
For the Labour leadership?
I think for Christmas, I want to have my family around me and I want to be able to put my feet up for a bit.
Were they all gutted? Your family, about the election result?
I can't go into that.
Oh.
Yeah, no, sorry.
Yeah. All right, that is it. Christmas at the Thornburys. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye. Thank you.
Welcome back. Ahead of tomorrow's announcement of the legislative programme, the Queen's Speech, I'll be talking to the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. But first, Anushka.
Thank you, Robert. Now, we've been talking about the story of this election, and I want to do a bit more of that. We know that on Friday, 54 seats that were red turned blue. That red wall falling that we've been talking about. Now, the question is, after Brexit, will these voters stay blue in the future? And it kind of depends on whether the domestic policies that the Conservatives push interest them. And I want to look at some data from unheard.com because they've been drilling down interviews on a range of issues in individual constituencies all over the country, and they looked at the 54 for us on the questions of immigration and tax. So firstly, they asked people, should immigrants be free to move to Britain and work? And in these 54 seats, 42% said no, they disagreed. That is significantly higher than the average for the country. So a tough stance on immigration presumably will be popular in those seats. But what about traditional economic policies? The poll also asked whether tax rates for high earners should be minimised to keep the UK competitive, a pretty traditional Tory idea. But in the 54 seats, actually quite similar to the average in the country, 42% disagreed. So tax cuts for the better off wouldn't necessarily be popular. And actually, it turns out that those deserting Labour weren't necessarily doing so because of economic policy. Let me show you some other figures here. This is overall people who didn't vote Labour. 43% say it was because of leadership, 17% Brexit, but quite a high number, 12%, say economic policies. But if we just look at those who deserted Labour for the Conservatives, so previously had backed the party, leadership is even bigger. Brexit is even bigger, but on economic policies, it slumps right down to only 6%. So, in a future election, with a new Labour leader and with no Brexit, will there be less of a reason to leave the Labour Party? Robert.
So, a very important question there, and I'm going to come back to this issue about whether you can keep these new Tory supporters who traditionally supported Labour. Let's just start, though, with your beat. There'll be some big announcements on hospitals in the Queen's Speech tomorrow. But when will British people start to feel that hospitals and indeed GP surgeries have got the resources they need? When will the health service feel better?
Well, we've got to start at that straight away. You know.
No, I know you're starting, but when are we going to feel that it is improved?
Well, this is why we're putting the money in now.
You're not answering.
Well, no, I was going to then make a very precise point, which is that We've got the 20 upgrades that the Prime Minister announced on the steps of Downing Street. As it happens, one of those in Leighton Hospital near Crewe is being completed this week. So there are already physical examples of the investment that we've put in since Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. And we've made some big commitments, as you know, in the manifesto, and we have to deliver on.
But it's obviously great for people in Crewe that there's, an improved service there. But nationally, I mean, you're saying you're going to get all these new nurses in. There's been a bit of controversy about the number, but as I say, when will we? When will very simple question. At the moment, pretty much every waiting target is being missed. When will you hit them?
Well, at the moment, the NHS is doing more than it's ever done. But demand is also going up faster, and this is why we need the new investment.
What's the point of having targets if you're not prepared to say when you're going to hit them?
Well, of course we need to deliver on those, but the most important thing, I think, is that when you make commitments in a manifesto, that you deliver on those commitments. So the 40 new hospitals over a decade, the 20 upgrades that are happening right across the country, as I say, one, being completed, the 50,000 more nurses. These are the commitments that we've made. And talking to the
But people will notice that you're not saying when you're going to hit these targets.
Well, I'm very clear on the targets that the long-term plan that we've already set out for the NHS includes being able to restore those, get back to that delivery on the targets, on the specific waiting time targets. But our challenge with the NHS is that the demand keeps going up. The population is getting older, and
but it does sound as though you're putting your excuses in early.
No, what it sounds like is I'm going to deliver on the commitments in the manifesto.
OK, but you haven't said when you're going to hit the targets. But look, let's move on to this really important question of all these people that you've persuaded for the first time in many cases to vote Tory. How are you going to keep them Tory?
Well, I think this is incredibly important. I mean, it's funny, we're only 6 days after the last election and you're already asking me questions about the next.
I'm not asking about the next. I'm just asking about a very fundamental question. One of the things that was so important about and so interesting about this election were the number of traditional Labour voters who backed you.
Well, it comes back to this point about delivering on our commitments. We have made commitments to people, and we feel very humble that millions of people, many of whom have never voted Tory before, many of whom, nobody in their family has ever voted Tory before, voted Conservative. And part of that was the commitments that we made, of course, to get Brexit done, and now we can do that on the 31st of January.
But one of the commitments,
also in the NHS. So these commitments are really important.
But one of the commitments in your manifesto was to maintain workers' rights. But one of the first things that Boris Johnson has done is to strip out of the withdrawal agreement bill the commitment to preserve workers' rights.
No, we've got that commitment in the manifesto. We'll meet the commitment in the manifesto.
How?
You don't have to do it in the same bill as something completely unrelated, which is how we leave the European Union.
Are you going to legislate to preserve workers' rights?
We're going to meet the commitment in the manifesto, absolutely. We're really focused on that. And
So
look, I was involved in writing the manifesto, and when we were writing it, of course we wanted to make sure the policies in it were popular, and on the whole they were. But we also were really focused on, if we win, can we deliver these? Because this comes back to the big issue of trust in politics. We only made commitments we really thought we could deliver.
But just on that issue of trust, one of the things you'll remember was that on the day that there was a huge amount of outrage about a little boy sleeping on the floor of Leeds General Infirmary, there was a bit of a kerfuffle outside the hospital. And your colleagues briefed that one of your aides was whacked when it's perfectly clear that he was just accidentally poked. It's not great for trust if, your people are spinning something that turns out to be a lie.
Well, look, that was a pretty robust experience, actually, and not what politics should be about. It should be about trying to bring people together. But
why were journalists misled on that?
But it's also... what really matters is that in the manifesto that we've published and on which we were elected, that we have the plans and we're immediately getting on with delivering the plans that we set out.
OK, you're sort of avoiding the
question. On this broader point, on the broader point about the voters who voted for us for the first time, many of them are people who have values that are shared with the Conservative Party, but for all sorts of reasons, including historical, haven't voted Conservative. And so I think
Minister, you are avoiding the question, but I need to press you. We haven't got a lot of time. I want to press you on a couple of things. You were Culture Secretary, a job I remember you enjoying tremendously.
Thoroughly.
How do you feel about the PM decriminalising the licence fee payment to the BBC, which many people think will mean that the BBC's revenues suffer considerably?
Oh, I don't think that's the consequence.
Why not?
Because there's so many...
If it becomes effectively a voluntary contribution, lots of people won't pay it.
Well, that isn't what it would become. There's so many bills in life that you have to pay. There's very few of them that you go to jail immediately. Because of. And also there's
do you think the Prime Minister will guarantee the BBC's income?
Well, there's a much bigger question, which is that, as we know, the media is changing, how people consume the media is changing. The direct connection between ownership and of a TV that you can turn on and paying a licence fee is something
I don't think you are guaranteeing
in the 20th century.
If better or worse, don't think you are guaranteeing their income.
I'm just saying that you've got to move with the times in life.
Look, finally, Philip Hammond, until recently a colleague of yours, says that the government is effectively an elected dictatorship. There's no serious opposition. You've got an enormous majority. Actually, normally, the history of British politics is when a government is as powerful as yours, you make endless mistakes, it'll be a disaster.
Well, I haven't seen that Philip said, but, really. What I would say is that we are incredibly focused on delivering on these commitments. We know that it is a real an honour to be elected with this scale of majority, and we've got a platform that we can deliver on. We're getting out of the trap straight away. 6 days in, we're already announcing, for instance, the
He says it's the
training
people's government, but putting his chums in the House of Lords, that's not a sign of a people's government, is it?
I thought there was a very practical way through.
It's not the only one.
It was a very practical way through.
Okay.
But crucially, I couldn't stress this more. We feel very deeply the responsibility we have, given the scale of the election result and the majority, to deliver on the commitments that we've made. I'm very excited about getting on with that, but more than that, I feel very strongly that we must, because people put their trust in us, and we must repay that trust.
Lovely to see you as always. Come back soon. I've just got a lot to pick up there with Melon and Andrea Jenkins. Andrea, just very quickly, first, you were desperate to come in when Emily was talking. What was it you wanted to say?
Well, I've sort of moved on now, actually.
I feel okay. Move on to whatever you want to move on to.
OK. I just think, well, let's just briefly touch on Melanie. Sorry, not Melanie, bless you. Let's briefly touch on Emily. I just think, really, Emily epitomises what is wrong with the Labour Party. They still do not believe it was a Brexit election. And you mentioned, Robert, it was about being patriotic. It wasn't. It was about delivering on democracy. And, we are the People's Party now. We are going to deliver on democracy. And can I just bring in one more thing, please? Because I haven't spoken much in this so far. But what I'm fed up of is the politicisation of the NHS. Every election, the NHS is politicised by the Labour Party. 24 hours to save the NHS, 2 weeks to save the NHS. And let me just tell you what I'm going to do. I've been in talks with one of the universities in London, and I'm going to set up a cross-party group which looks at the NHS right up to 2050. We're going to take the politics out of it, and let's have some real grown-up decisions, because the NHS belongs to the people. It doesn't belong to politicians. So we need to be talking about the expanding population. We need to be talking about the ageing population and have some grown-up discussions, because I want to see the next election Labour stop politicising the NHS and putting the fear of God into people.
Health is inevitably going to be political, isn't it?
It is entirely political, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to spending decisions, when it comes to responsibility, that all lies in the gift of politicians. And, it's tried to... some of that's tried to be shifted down to CCGs. They take the responsibility of deciding where spending is undertaken and things like that.
But can I pick up on actually something that Andrea just said? This issue of you know, essentially being proud of the country. And as I say, many people thought, maybe wrongly, that Jeremy Corbyn isn't proud enough of the United Kingdom. Did you hear that on the doorstep?
I did. Unfortunately, I did. You know, it doesn't give me any great pleasure to say things like that. But yes, there were concerns going back to not singing the national anthem, not feeling like he was for our armed forces. There is a big ex-armed forces population in Grimsby, and people felt that he was standing up for other people and not standing up for them. And that is a tragedy, really, when you think of the history of the Labour Party and the fact that it is lots of working class people who join the armed forces and, you know, frankly, they are sent into you know, the wars of our country and very often put their lives at risk. And the impact on working class communities has been huge. And I think that there was a disconnect there.
Yeah, very important to hear that from you, Mel. So, lots more to talk about. After the break, I will be joined by the writer, comedian and all-round know-it-all, David Baddiel.
I'm delighted to be joined by David Baddiel in the Twitter break. Welcome.
Hello. Hello,
Hashtag
Twitter.
Peston.
Hello, Twitter.
Well, as you may know, David Baddiel gets a lot of trolling on Twitter and is very good at responding to it. And so you're
Yeah.
going to do a little lesson for us, aren't you?
Well, it depends on what you show
On
me, but
responding.
yeah.
Well, I'm going to show you the ones that we've seen today, but I just want to show you this one quickly to me because I tweeted that I was going to wear a Christmassy outfit on
Yeah.
Peston. Hope it's not too distracting. And someone replied, probably, and I do hate that whiteboard.
Well, this. They hate this.
They hate it.
It's not even a whiteboard,
It's
Mark.
greeny. Well,
it's
anyway.
a blue and green board.
I said, Merry Christmas to you two, and
Well,
blew
well
him
done.
a kiss.
Well
Let's go
done.
through some of the others. OK, Martin Ware. Just like to say thanks for helping to ruin our democracy.
That's
That was
this show has ruined our
ITV
democracy,
Peston.
apparently.
What did
OK,
you
well, I
hear?
don't know. Well, you can do, I mean, the first thing, the basic tip I have for you is never get angry. Always kind of disarm and maybe agree with the troll
Zen.
at some level. So what I would say, but then find something else about them to
OK.
get back to them. So here you could agree, you could say, well, thanks very much for that. I don't know who ruined your hair. Perhaps it was your own wrist, for example.
Very, very good.
I don't watch Peston because I can't understand what he is saying. That's a terrible thing to say about Robert. Again, you could notice something about this person and you could say, well, I'm sorry about that. Robert doesn't speak dog.
This is so good. I need you every day by my side. OK, Eddie Woolley. That's lots of
Lots of people.
MPs
I'd rather
and us.
go to the dentist than watch that lot talk out of their backside. So something I do sometimes do on Twitter is I say to the troll, in a helpful way again, always be helpful, always sound disarming, is like do a bit of a comedy workshop. So with this joke, I'd rather go to the dentist than watch that lot talk out their backsides. I would say, I'm sorry, Eddie, I think it'd be much funnier to say I'd rather go to the proctologist. Do you see? That would work much
What
better.
is a proctologist?
It's someone who looks up your bottom. Sorry, I had to say that.
All right, here we go. Robert.
OK, here's a bit of a big one. If you're reading this, you can participate in a bit of history. You can watch my new show live on Twitter at 8 before it goes out. Blimey. And James' daughter said, why have you not been fired? I think Robert should just have replied, we're not doing the show on Twitter. That would have been the thing to say, I think, for that. Just cancel the whole show.
No!
No. But yeah, I mean, just essentially, you know, just go with what they've said.
Fine.
Just,
All right.
just be fine with it. That's what I would.
All right. Thank you very much for
Thank
your
you
time.
very much.
Thank you.
Am I going?
Welcome back. In just a moment, I'll be speaking with the magnificent David Baddiel. But first, Anushka.
Thank you, Robert. Now, David Baddiel attracts a lot of trolls on Twitter, but unlike some others, he doesn't always shy away from responding or even highlighting those who have attacked him. And I'm just going to quickly show you a couple of examples. Here you go. So someone said, so that's all right then, nothing to see here, just a little inactive anti-Semitism. Let's make him PM and hope everything will be kosher. What a stupid tweet. To which David replied, as regulars will know, I like nothing better than idiot missing the point trolling from both sides of the argument. It does make me feel like the original tweet hit the spot. And here's one more. Your lack of awareness is something to behold. Look closely at how they spelt. It's right up there, in fact, with your lack of awareness of how to spell your. Robert.
Thanks, Anushka. Well, we might talk a little bit about trolling now with David Baddiel. I think you've got a whole show coming up about this, have you?
I have. Well, not just about... It's called Trolls Not the Dolls, and it's touring from January, and it is about social media.
And how do you sustain
rage.
it across an hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever?
Well, you'd have to come and see, Robert. I'm not going to do it all now, am I? But it's not... It is partly about that. It's partly about how to respond to trolls, but it's about a larger subject as well, which is the way that rage and anger and binary thinking and a complete lack of nuance and bullying has sort of taken over and infected the entire body politic. And it begins, I would say, on Twitter and social media. And I think that people still at some level think, isn't this just some people arguing on a website? It is, but it's also something that has completely taken over the way that people argue in life. And also, let's not forget, a troll is president of the United States. So it's not like it had no effect. This isn't a fringe discourse. This is something that's right at the centre of power.
I agree with that. And but can I just ask about... I mean, I suppose, you know, it sounds like I'm going to see my therapist here, but over the last few weeks, the amount of online abuse that's been directed towards me, I mean, I've always had a lot of it, but it's literally gone through...
I'm sorry about that, Robert. I'll delete my account if you like.
It's literally gone through the roof. I just wondered... You know, do you think that after the election things will settle down? Do you think it is just that in elections everybody gets amazingly overexcited?
Well, I think it peaks during an election, but I don't think it's going to settle down, as we can see from the amount of hatred and anger that's happening within Labour Party online discussions at the moment as they try and work out who to blame for what went wrong. That doesn't seem to be a very balanced discussion. In terms of what happened to you and what happened to, what's her name? The woman. Laura, thank you. Laura Koonsberg at the BBC. I tweeted the other day that because the Tories seem to be trying to dismantle the BBC, and at the same time, lots of Labour Party people are furious that they apparently had Tory bias, we can only assume that the only thing that wins arguments is, in fact, confirmation bias, right? And what I mean by that is, whatever you did, whatever Laura Koonsberg did, there will be some people on the right who think you're biased towards the left, and vice versa.
That's precisely right. I get hate from literally every point of the political spectrum, except possibly for Jo Swinson, but I think there was even a difficult moment with her at one point.
Right.
But nonetheless, no, more or less...
Have you ever thought of responding to it? You don't respond to it
on the whole... No, I never reply to... I don't do what you do, which is I keep saying by ignoring it as much as I can, but certainly never responding. But why isn't the answer... just to give it all up?
Give up social media?
Just give up social media. Don't you think we should just...
Well,
those of us who don't have hate, don't you think we should just give it all up?
Well, just in terms of the responding thing, very early on, one of the very few laws of the lawless internet was don't feed the trolls, right? Don't respond to these people. And that's a good thing to do for a lot of people, but I'm a comedian and they are hecklers. That's essentially what they are. They are voices in the anonymous dark saying, you're rubbish, get off, in one way or another. And my job involves trying to make that stuff funny. And if I can make it funny, in my opinion, I am making laughter and joy out of something ugly and horrible, which I've done before. I did a show about my dad's dementia. I've done shows about my late mum's sex life. It wasn't entirely ugly and horrible, but it had some moments in it. And so my process is to try and find the laughter, find the joy and comedy in these things. That isn't right for everyone, and it's probably not right for you, you know. And I think that in terms of, like, should we, as a culture, get rid of social media?
No, not get rid of it, but do you think, you know, those of us who've got other things in our lives might be better employed just doing other things with our lives? I mean, actually, truthfully, for me, it's a very useful tool. It's not a serious point. I'm not planning to give it up, apart from anything else. Except very occasionally, I hardly ever get upset by the nastiness. Do you ever? I just wanted to ask you, as I say, do you ever get upset by what people
partly the show is a diary because I've been on Twitter for 10 years, and I am clearly slightly addicted to it, and I have a slightly love-hate relationship with it. I think as a comedian, you've got an audience. You think of a joke, suddenly you can put it out there.
I see that.
So it becomes.
But do you ever get upset?
No, I'm going to come to that. I mean, and one of the things I do, particularly in the second half of my show, is show how dark and awful it can get. And I think one of the things about responding to it in a funny way is that you can normalise it a bit too much sometimes. And you can think, like, hang on a sec, this isn't normal to wake up in the morning and see abuse sort of in your own house at you. But on the other hand, I have to say, and the show also deals with this, sometimes you see the most incredibly funny, joyful, creative things. Sometimes I will respond to a troll with a joke, and people will build on that joke and take it completely different places.
I agree
and it's really brilliant.
Yeah, some of that stuff is absolutely magnificent.
It is brilliant. And sometimes, you know,
and life-affirming.
Yeah, life-affirming. And social media, let's be honest about it, it's there, it is communication. It is community. And I think human beings, when they're in a public community, they will start doing some horrible stuff, slamming doors in people's faces. They will also open doors, and both exist, and we have to accept that, maybe.
Can I just ask Mel, I mean, you're not going to be an MP for a bit anyway. Now that you're not going to be quite so active in politics, do you think you might just give up social media?
Yeah, I tried to deactivate it the following day, and
Really?
And I just haven't, and I've been back on it, and I don't think
So
it was
you're
the right
addicted
thing
like
to
the
do.
rest of us.
I am, and I still wake up in the middle of the night, and I'm still looking at it, and I'm still checking it.
You shouldn't do it in the middle of the night, Melanie. Definitely don't do that.
It's just a natural reaction
When
if I wake up, see what's going on.
When you say you tried to deactivate it, did you?
Yeah.
Technically, you couldn't do it, or your hand just
I couldn't
wavered?
remember my password.
OK.
Have you ever been tempted to give it up, Andrea?
I gave it up for 2 months in the summer. I mean,
Right.
I've had death threats. I've had, people writing on my wall to kill myself. I've had some really vile tweets questioning my ability as being a good mother. But like David, sometimes I'm a northerner. I believe in fighting back. I'll do fight back, and I might take the mickey out of them, or I might actually say, well, do you know something? I wish you well, because living a life with such a miserable existence, it cannot be a good way of life. So God bless.
Right.
So, but I came off it for 2 months because I needed a break, and I just let my team, update it, and it did me good.
Yeah.
But it is a tool. I mean, as I've spoke to Robert earlier, I'm going to set up an APPG, cross-party group on cyberbullying, because what really opened my eyes, I visited one of the local colleges in my area, and like us who's in the in the public domain, we sort of accept it in a way, which it's not necessarily good to accept. Our shoulders keep getting broader. But this one particular girl who said to me, she was like 17, that she puts on social media a vision of herself, what is acceptable to her peer group. And, somewhere along the line, that's going to come up and bite her and have mental health issues, I think, because people should be able to be themselves. So this is why I'm setting this cyberbullying cross-party group.
It's not just about bullying, it's also affected the whole of, I think, political discourse. Because I would say before social media, like I'm doing a documentary, I've done it, I filmed it, it's going to be on next year, about Holocaust denial for the BBC. And it's called Confronting Holocaust Denial, it'll be on in February. And I would say one of the reasons why I decided to do that was, 20 years ago, maybe you could say, like, just ignore it. Now, you can't really ignore it because, it's no good saying don't give them airtime. They have airtime, just not on screens like this. So I would say political discourse, which maybe was the acceptability spectrum was this, now it's kind of this. And that has happened really because of social media.
And I'm going to change the subject very briefly. Traditionally, you've been a Labour supporter. Do you have a view as to who should lead the party? Easy one. You've only got 30 seconds.
Keir Starmer, but I am a bit worried about his hair. His hair's a bit wavy. This is Jeff Norcott, a comedian's joke. He said he looks a bit like the bloke in the Gold Blend advert. He does a little bit. But I would go for Keir Starmer.
Well, that was always a very popular advert.
Very popular advert, yeah. And people say, oh, is he working class enough? I don't know if recent evidence would suggest the country is that bothered about voting for a person with working class credentials.
You may be right about it. Anyway, look, thank you so much for coming on. I shall be coming to see your show, definitely. That's it. What a year. We're taking a short seasonal break, and we'll see you again for all the new fun and political games on the 15th of January. Happy Hanukkah and Merry Christmas.